What's good for the Jews is a phrase that was coined when American Jews were clearly outsiders, a time when we were excluded from Ivy League schools and restricted from living in certain neighborhoods, yes, even in Memphis. Good for the Jews had a clear meaning pre-World War II in the desperate effort to save Jewish refugees as immigration doors closed for our people. We gather on this New Year's Eve, 71 years after the Holocaust, 68 years after the establishment of the State of Israel, and 56 years after Yale officially phased out its last Jewish quota, in a very different world and context. In 5 words, we are no longer outsiders. It hit me at a recent national board meeting of the NAACP, where I am the only rabbi and Jewish representative. I came prepared to discuss the issues affecting the Jewish community domestically, and found myself listening instead to the heroic men and women working on the front lines to end poverty, voter suppression, unjust criminal sentencing, and health disparities. I sat with a West Coast civil rights leader who informed me that housing costs have skyrocketed so high in his city of San Francisco that the total number of black folks who can afford to live in San Francisco is smaller than the number of fans in attendance at a Giants baseball game. Here I was, the new insider in the oldest and most distinguished civil rights organization in America, realizing that the Jewish community I represent in 2016 is not on the outside. As a community, we are on the inside of the American dream, from business and politics to higher education and the professions. Here I was, a rabbi, grounded in Judaism's fundamental interest in a more equitable society for all, realizing that not only are American Jews no longer outsiders, most of us have forgotten what it even feels like to be an outsider. For much of history, we have been outsiders in the societies where we have lived. As our Reform rabbinic colleague Steve Einstein notes, from our years as slaves in Egypt, we internalized the message, know the heart of the stranger, because you were among the most vulnerable strangers wherever you lived as Jews. This is a key message of our religion. It's repeated over 30 times in the Torah. But I fear, Einstein writes, that many of us are not listening to these words of Torah. Whether we are Reform, conservative, or Orthodox, we are so busy pursuing the American dream and often achieving it that we have lost the sense of being outsiders. Worse, we have lost our feeling for those who are still on the outside. This isn't just a Jewish problem. It's what they call a first world problem. First world problems are frustrations experienced by privileged individuals in wealthier countries. A first world problem is trivial when contrasted with a truly serious problem experienced by people in the developing world. For example, 1 in 10 people globally lack access to safe water. That is a third world problem. A first world problem is when you get frustrated that your square Fiji water bottle won't fit in the circular cup holder of your car. Another first world example, the poster of an upset adult with the caption, "I hate when my phone charger won't reach my bed." Or the guy visibly upset inside a restaurant saying, "I hate when I tell them no pickles and they still give me pickles. We first world insiders can relate to these irritations like bad service at a restaurant or resort. An outsider is someone who has no access to a bed, a toilet, food, or even safe water to drink. Good for the Jews implies that there are things good for us that aren't good for the rest of humanity. But I would contend that what is good for Jews must also be good for humanity. And what is bad for the Jews is bad for humanity. One issue, which is bad for Jews and bad for humanity, is a problem American Jews overlook. You couldn't overlook it if you were born in Europe or if you lived in the Arab world before it got rid of its 900,000 Jews over the past 70 years. It's an issue that has been a barometer of man's inhumanity to man. Anti-Semitism. In a talk just a few days ago to the European Parliament, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs declared, "The hate that begins with the Jews never ends with the Jews." It was never Jews alone who suffered under Hitler or Stalin or today's victims of Al-Qaeda and ISIS, he said. Anti-Semitism is a threat first and foremost to Europe and to the freedoms it took centuries to achieve. Anti-Semitism is not about Jews. It is about anti-Semites. It is about people who cannot accept responsibility for their own failures and instead have to blame someone else. Historically, Rabbi Sachs adds, if you were a Christian at the time of the Crusades or German after the First World War, and you saw that the world had not turned out as you thought it would, you blamed the Jews. This is what is happening today, he continues in his 20-minute talk. And it's dangerous not only for Jews, it is dangerous for everyone who cherishes freedom, compassion, and humanity. This talk is entitled, "The Mutating Virus, Understanding Anti-Semitism." And his argument is that the appearance of anti-Semitism, which means denying the right of Jews to exist as Jews with the same rights as everyone else, the appearance of anti-Semitism in a culture is bad for humanity because it's the symptom of a disease and the early warning sign of collective breakdown. Now, Rabbi Sachs is an older Orthodox rabbi, and while always thoughtful and eloquent, his warning is unsurprising. The buried lead, the story not in the headlines this past year in the Jewish world, was the other article by one of world Jewry's most articulate millennial leaders and leftists, a 30-something named Yotam Moram, an American child of Israeli parents. Moram is a founding member of the organization If Not Now, which, like Shimon Peres in his later years, got fed up with the all talk but no action of Israel's current government to plant seeds of peace among the 3 million Palestinians who will have lived under Israeli occupation for what will be 50 years in 2017. In this essay, very long, entitled "Toward the Next Jewish Rebellion, Facing Anti-Semitism," I just want to read to you part of it. It is a bright summer day in July 2014. I'm in Midtown Manhattan, Maroon writes, surrounded by thousands of people protesting the Israeli assault on Gaza, which began a week ago. The march is alive, folks dancing, singing, banners waving. It's full of families led by young people, mothers in hijabs pushing strollers, kids waving Palestinian flags. There's a palpable feeling of warmth and hope and resilience, even amidst the heartbreak and fury and mourning. I'm glad I'm here with these people. Then Marom says, I see a poster that shows the Jewish Star of David with an equal sign next to a Nazi swastika. I see the ultra-Orthodox Neturei Karta Jewish sect in their black coats and Hasidic hats and beards paraded at the front of the demonstration as if to say, look, even the Jews hate Israel, even though Neturei Karta are anti-Zionist merely because they believe the land of Israel should be settled only after the Messiah comes. Another sign says, good job, Israel, Hitler would be proud. And a poster shows Israeli soldiers alongside black and white photos of the SS. No one says anything about it. Marom says, I don't immediately identify these signals as proof that the movement is anti-Semitic. After all, I know that claims of anti-Semitism are constantly used as a ploy by the conservative right to smear the entire left and defend the worst of Israel. I remember that I too have been called a self-hating Jew for criticizing Israel, which, by the way, I think is a word that should be expunged from our Jewish vocabulary, self-hating Jew, simply for disagreeing or dissenting. I also know, Marom continues, that the discomfort of American Jews who have achieved an unprecedented level of prosperity and security cannot even begin to compare to the suffering of the Palestinians or of black folks being shot down in America's streets. Nonetheless, I feel sick to my stomach, he says. I think back to posts written on Facebook and articles friends have shared. And then it hits me like an anvil. Yes, there is anti-Semitism on the left as well as the right. And it is a threat not only to me, but to all of us. It dawns on me that this anti-Semitism I've been brushing under carpets my whole life sits not only in the far reaches where folks peddle conspiracy theories about Jews controlling the banks and media. It creeps up here in the open. My knot turns into hot anger. Why doesn't anyone say anything about this? And then it occurs to me that I, too, the leftist, have said nothing. I said nothing when my friends shared articles about how the U.S. was tricked by Jews into supporting Israel. As if, Marom says in his leftist language, an organ as powerful as AIPAC can be held responsible for centuries of U.S. imperialist foreign policy, as if it's always the all-powerful Jews behind the scenes pulling the strings. I said nothing about the deafening silence of my friends when children were murdered at the Jewish day school in France, or the shootings at the Jewish community centers in Kansas City and Seattle, the bat mitzvah shot up in Denmark, the Jewish stores destroyed in Brussels, the synagogues firebombed in Germany, the Jewish graves defaced in Toronto, as if Jews today are too powerful to have compassion for. And I said nothing went over and over and over again. My Facebook friends posted that Israel is the leading cause of anti-Semitism today, and that therefore we Jews are at fault for other people's hatred of us, as if a minority group could ever be held responsible for other people's categorical hatred of that entire group. As if any of my friends in the movement would tolerate that kind of talk about African Americans or Muslims or anyone else. I said nothing about the silence about all of this. And he says the silence is what broke his heart the most. The measure of anti-Semitism in a society is not the number of synagogues being burned to the ground at any given moment. Even when Jews aren't being rounded onto cattle cars, anti-Semitism spreads on the internet like wildfire. Sadly, Jews on the right have internalized anti-Semitism, and Jews who lean left have ignored it, both to their detriment. We Jews even use anti-Semitism as a weapon against each other. Right-wing Israeli leaders use anti-Semitism or the fear of it to justify aggressive military measures. for leaders on the right in Israel and America, fear of anti-Semitism, both real and imagined, is used as a weapon. The unhealed trauma generationally passed down, which I would argue some of us in the sanctuary are products of, perpetuates the claim, for instance, that Israelis can never build trust with a Palestinian entity of any kind and work toward peace as Shimon Peres dared to do. Marome says, when I hear some right-wing Jews talk amongst themselves about Palestinians, it's not much different than the way white people used to talk about coloreds and black people. But by ignoring anti-Semitism on the left, we will never be able to bring our most powerful selves to the justice struggles in which Jews have been disproportionately active in looking out for the outsider. In this new year, it would be good for us as a people to break open the ways we have internalized anti-Semitism so that we can tell a different story about ourselves. People should be able to disagree on the best way to achieve peace in the Middle East without being labeled. How ironic that anti-Semitism itself has become a wedge to pit conservative-leaning Jews against progressive and liberal-leaning Jews. One longtime temple member who wrote me on this subject said, and I quote, "Today there aren't visible and tangible barriers to Jews, barring them from colleges and careers and country clubs. But unlike 1938, when mass communication came from a muffled radio and local newspaper, mass communication today is instantaneous and global and within the reach of every hate group and everyone willing to read and listen. A virus," she writes, "even on the internet, spreads quickly and takes deep root in the unsuspecting and even those who feel the same way, and the anonymity of the internet emboldens people filled with hate to act on their bigotry. I'm afraid that Jews in the comfort of America have a false sense of security." I'm not predicting doom and gloom, she says. I just think we should be aware. Amen to that, and to speaking out, to acknowledging the presence of anti-Semitism across the spectrum, but may we never let it infect us or stray us from our urgent task as Jews to spread goodness, compassion, empathy, and humanity to every child of God. Anti-Semitism has been ignored by too many people on the left, and it has also paralyzed the thinking of many Jews on the right. If we Jews have risen up against some of the most violent, conquering armies ever assembled in history, if we fought for civil rights, if we led student movements, stood up to apartheid, Marome is right that we should all call out this evil too. We are survivors, my friends, of never-ending attempts to wipe out our people. But we never became warmongers or like them in response. We are the people famous for carrying Seinfeld humor, Einstein intelligence, and a commitment to truth as forms of resilience and resistance. We ignore the corrosive impact of anti-Semitism at our own peril, both as a people and for humanity. That's why it is good for humanity, not just Jews, to expose the unjust and hateful slurs. From anti-Israel language in the National Black Lives Matter platform, to condoning support for former Ku Klux Klan Grand Wizard and open Nazi sympathizer David Duke. In closing, let us never forget that this Jewish New Year called Rosh Hashanah does not focus on the Jewish people's birth. It's the birthday of humanity. This is the birthday of the world. And it's a reminder that it is bad for Jews when we forget our greater humanity And it can only be good for Jews and all humanity when we remember our Torah's highest values of dignity, justice, compassion, love, and the equal image of God in every child of God. On that day, our Torah teaches, God's name will be one, and so will we. Ken yehi ratzon, so may it be. Amen.